Okay, so take a second. Make sure you are relaxed. There's never, ever, ever a problem with relaxation. It always helps, doesn't it?
Yes.
So it's a good idea to learn how to stop. It's a big, big part of what we're doing going forward. To stop and address the tension, address the stress. Let's address the stress. What's the address of stress? Right here, right now. That's where it lives. So relax, yeah? Learn to relax. The key to life, this kind of life, a big key to it is learning how to deal with stress and tension, whether it's mental or physical. To relax. As you relax, you become more aware, or rather, your body relaxes, and so you get to experience more of the present moment in a relaxed way. And it's always nice, it's always good. To do that though, you've got to take the pressure off. Get rid of any imaginings, any plannings, any strategies, any fantasies, any controlling, any attempts to control what's happening. And instead to just be with what's happening as it's happening. And in that place you can relax. Alright, so what is this all about? What are we doing?
I want to talk about practical steps
Okay.
for people who are beginning to awaken or have awakened to the great deception of society. People who are in that early stage, or people who are in the thick of it at the moment. What are some practical steps that people can take to begin to remove themselves from the ego of society or the deception and the corruption of society? How can people step out practically?
Okay, well, there are many steps that you can take. One step that it's wise to take, which is not essential, really, although it is in a way. Let me explain. Why are you waking up to the deception? Can you see, can you identify why now? Why now are you able to see this? What's going on in your life? What is happening that is now all of a sudden making you aware of a certain degree of insanity in society? There is a process at work here. Something is shifting, something is changing. Are you familiar with that? Because if you're not, you might just be looking at the world thinking there's corruption in the politics or the system or something, and then you might just want to try and do something about that corruption without really addressing or knowing, where does that corruption come from? How did it get there? Why is society dominated by that? And what does it have to do with you in your own personal life? So a fundamental key element in this, a practical element, is getting to grips with the cause of this corruption. What is the corruption? What is at the heart of the insanity? That's the ego. So learning to look into the nature of ego is essential. Now, that's practical in the sense of you have to do that. You have to begin to identify what the ego is. You have to be able to see it. You have to see the illusions that sustain the ego and how it, in its operation, thrives on delusion, which is self-centered, the origin of which is an apparent identity. So this is very deep. This is a very deep problem. So that's definitely something that a person would have to begin to contemplate. What is the ego? Which brings us to, or brings that person to the question of what is myself? What is yourself? What is the self? Which leads down the road of exploring what consciousness itself is. So that's the bigger picture of like, you have to start to get to grips with that if you really want to transition away from a society that is insane and ruled by a corrupted, greedy, destructive force. Well, you have to know that our ego is responsible for that, our collective ego. And then you have to be committed to uncovering that ego within yourself and overcoming it. And you won't be able to do that if you can't identify what the ego is. So that's one thing that has to be begun to be inquired into from somebody who's just completely new to this, who's not really knowing how to manage their life from now on, now that they're starting to sense some kind of deception or some kind of corruption, or however they would want to put it. There's all sorts of ways that it gets labeled. How to turn your life in a new direction, you have to begin to inquire into the nature of consciousness and ego and what that is. So, I'm not going to go into too many definitions of it here as to what it is, because it's very deep. We can do that at some point. Mm-hmm. That does need to be gone into. But, so that's one element that somebody would have to begin to look at. Another kind of really practical element is to begin to detach from material seeking. So the current model of economy is very much built around this desire for material success, aspiring for material possessions. It manifests as constant consumption of material resources. We can see that everywhere we look. We're just what's the word? We're going through resources faster than ever before. Material resources are being drained, just used repeatedly to create products and services that people want to buy, and then waste product comes from that. We're just chewing through the resources of this place because it's seeking some kind of happiness in material means, via material means. So naturally then, and logically, a person who wasn't wanting to go that way anymore would have to begin to detach from an incessant and constant material seeking, or of a seeking of happiness or a finding of purpose in life via material means. So you begin to detach from this seemingly never-ending material seeking and learn to be content with more of a simple experience on the daily. Have little material needs, have little material desires, and begin to sustain your essential material needs, which are shelter, food, drinking water, simple experiences, simple relationships. And if somebody begins to live that way, a lot of time opens up in their life. And in that time, if that time is managed well and perhaps filled with various spiritual disciplines and forms of spiritual inquiry, then the life that person is experiencing begins to take a different shape. And that evolves over time. But that's where you would begin. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does.
Do you want to go into any more depth?
Well, I think I'll keep building on kind of that. So, okay. You said that you move towards a more simple life, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. So, what do people need to be prepared for when they're stepping out of that society?
Well, there are various challenges to detaching from the egoic conditioning, and each person will have different experiences of that challenge. The question is a little bit too broad because there are 14,000 things you have to be prepared for, So to give you a general, and again, you get this a lot in our discussions, is if a person had that question and they really wanted a very specific answer for their specific circumstances, they will need to ask that question themselves, because I will need to ask them, where are you? What are you doing? What's your current circumstances like? How are your relationships going? How's your mental health? How's your physical health? Because all of those things will be affected as you begin to turn away from the popular egoic conditioning of current society. As you begin to turn your life in a different direction, all of those things are going to be affected somehow. And one very easy example to give you straight away is you might have a very loving and supportive and awake family around you who are going to help you and encourage you to detach because they want to as well. But you also might have a very toxic, abusive family around you. So for those two different people who have two different kinds of families, the process is going to be drastically different. Their experience of how their relationship with their family evolves is going to be very different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So some of you might have kids, some of you might not. So like, how are the kids going to be affected? You know, there's so many things to be looked into with regards to this. So a general answer is, be prepared for lots of things to change. Don't rush it. There's no need to rush. Seek wise counsel and wise support and friendship and communion and community and connection with other people who are going through similar experiences to you. The reason for that is, at times it can be very challenging, and it really depends on the specific, again, of the person. It can be very difficult to begin to detach and then sustain that detachment from the operation of the ego on this planet within yourself, because it's also environmental, right? People around you can be consumed by that. You can be encountering it nonstop at work. Some businesses, some forms of work exist purely as servants to the ego. So if you're in a job like that, you're going to have to change job. You know, it's going to become too difficult for you. You just keep getting consumed by the shit again. So the question is a bit too broad, really, without giving a very generalized answer like that. Like if I was to answer the question for you, that would be tremendously deep and possibly a little bit too deep for a lot of people, you know, because you're really wanting to detach to the point where you're really picking up the lifestyle. So you're quite far into the process. So you want to be, I would have to be cautious about giving that answer to people who are really maybe just approaching this. And you asked about people who are just starting out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I would say from my own experience that you just as well really need to have courage. Like you really need to be prepared to step out of what you know and step into the unknown and be courageous. Just keep moving forward with that.
Right.
Because once you kind of do awaken, you can't go back.
Right.
There's no choice in it. So you have to go forward, and you need to be courageous in that because it goes against so much of what you know.
Sure. Which reveals so many anxieties and fears that need to be overcome. Yeah. Like fears come up, strategies of the ego to drag you back into it, to make you afraid to leave, afraid to evolve, afraid to change, can come up. And so the way you overcome that is through stillness, through cultivation of deep presence and stillness and connecting with your heart, through relaxation, which is how we began this whole process. So again, you know, if specific issues are coming up for a person, there's a very specific answer to those problems.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you really need to know the specifics to prescribe the correct medicine.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The answer to the ego is the same. The answer to the problem of the ego is always stillness, deep stillness. The ego is a constant movement of the psychology of the brain of the person, which is fraught with delusion and sustained by fear. So as you transcend that movement and enter into very deep stillness in life, which is presence, the ego dissolves. But the effect that that will have on your life will be dramatic, and it can change the whole chemistry of the system of the body. Many of us here have had to detach from family members, from types of work, from jobs, from specific elements of lifestyle that we were living because they were no longer appropriate for us. We were just getting dragged back into very toxic environments. And so, you know, it's cruel to, and you just don't do this. You don't tell people to go and tap into stillness. If you're having a problem with the ego and you just say, go and practice really, really deep stillness, and that's going to solve everything. Go away and cultivate stillness, but be prepared for what that stillness is going to do to your life. because it can transform lots of things dramatically. And it's really wonderful. Ultimately, it's a wonderful shift and a wonderful change. But there can be elements of your consciousness that fight it, that battle it, that confuse it, that fragment it and make it more painful and more difficult than it really needs to be. And because we don't know who we're talking to here, we don't know who's actually listening to this, it would be very unwise to give a very specific answer and say, this is what everybody should do. Do you understand?
Yes.
So it's just a caution around it, yeah. Which is why people really should reach out if they have those questions and they want to have that conversation. And they need like you go to a doctor and you say, right, here's my symptoms. Okay, well, there's a very specific way of dealing with that. If the doctor just called everyone and said, put a Band-Aid on it, put a Band-Aid on it, put a Band-Aid on it, like, no, that's not appropriate. You know what I mean? Depending on the issue, yeah.
Energy and effort needs to be put into it.
Right, and but you have to be aware of the effect. Someone's got a gigantic gash in their neck and they're pouring out blood and someone says, put a Band-Aid on it. No, it's not appropriate. Someone's got a rash or a bacterial infection, put a Band-Aid on it. No, that's not the right. So you can't just say, go and tune into stillness. For everyone, it's not appropriate. You need to know how that's going to manifest. The circumstances that they're in, that person needs to be aware that as they cultivate stillness, it's going to have an effect on their situation. They also need to be prepared for that. You know, when you take medication, there are side effects to taking a certain medication. Well, the medication of deep stillness has side effects on the ego and how it operates and on the consciousness of that person. So a teacher or a guide would absolutely be watching for those side effects and need to know about them in order to then address the side effect as the consciousness begins to shift and change in a certain way. It's a long-term process.
Yeah, and it's very serious and very deep because
it's very serious. It's very deep.
Life and death.
You're dealing with life and death, right?
Yeah.
The person's life. A wonderful example of this, you'll hear this from multiple places. You won't hear this from New Age teachers who just tell you to go away and meditate and that's the answer to all your problems in life. But, Sadhguru is a wonderful example who comes to mind of, he was giving a talk to his audience and he just explains to people that depending on where a person is, the process of devotion, as he put it in his language, devotion to deep awakening can completely destroy your life, can completely tear apart the foundations with which you have built your life. And if that's necessary, you will have to go through it and you will need support to go through that. So, but for some people, that will be a terrifying prospect and it will feel like their whole life is falling apart. But as somebody else who's in a slightly different place, spiritually speaking, goes through the same process, everything will feel like a gigantic release of a burden and they will be in heaven. They will be having a wonderful time as their life falls apart, as all of these illusions break down. So it really depends what side of the coin you are on. And a lot of people are going to be on a kind of grasping, anxious side of the coin. And so to be there for those people, to offer them support, to offer them words of encouragement, to be a friend to those people. Don't leave them alone when they're terrified and they're going through these very difficult situations, especially if they're in environments surrounded by other people who aren't doing it. So it's just more of a nuanced relationship and answer needs to be given to that question for it to be more appropriate. But it's a good question. Yeah.
I had some insight in my meditation a couple of days back. I think it was over the weekend, so a few days ago now, about how having a teacher or like going through this process, you feel like you're wading out into the depths of the ocean and you kind of start to feel like you're drowning. And then having a teacher is like having someone there with like a life jacket or one of those like inflatable rings, and you've got that on you and you're fine. And you're like,
if been floating out here for a while.
Yeah, I know this place well. If you want to like hang on to my inflatable device and you want to go where I'm going, you can do that. I'll help you.
It's really just learning how to float. Yeah, learning how to float.
I know where there's more of these floaties.
There's a real relationship in awareness. There's a real relationship life is having with itself in awareness as awareness, and it's full of love and it's full of compassion and it's full of care. And the process of detaching from the ego is real, has an effect, and at times it can feel like you're drowning. It can feel like you're lost and that you're alone. And if you have there is still a resource, even if you are going through that alone, there is a resource within you, which is where you have to go. You have to go inward through the chaos, through the turbulence, and find that point of deep stillness inside of you, which awakens you to a tremendous peace in which the ego dissolves, and the ego is seen through. But at the same time, even after that experience, you come back to the relationship that you're having with life, which means that all of the life here. So to cultivate a relationship, to have a relationship with a guide, somebody who's been through the process, someone who's kind of floating around, enjoying themselves on the surface, who can say, look, stop thrashing, you're just thrashing, you're fighting the process. Relax, can be there, hold your hand. It's called the quickening, because it helps you get through the crap quicker. And so if you're going off track and you're deviating and your guide is with you and he can see you're struggling and you're hurting yourself, he'll just encourage you to relax. So he's just a support, you know. Yeah,
I have seen multiple times if I was left to my own devices, I would be diverting in all different directions, and it's incredibly helpful to have a guide or a teacher who knows how to just gently push you back on track.
Right.
So
that's the traditional relationship within mysticism of guide and person being led, or teacher-student, or master and apprentice, master and student. Mm-hmm. It's a very traditional relationship.
Yeah. And I think earlier you spoke about how important your environment is. So I want to kind of go into that a bit more. Why is it so important for the environment around you to reflect the process that you're going through, like what you're consuming on a daily basis with regards to media, consuming within your relationships, consuming food or alcohol or drugs? Why is the environment so important for the process?
Okay, so let's have a little bit of fun with the answer to this one. There are many ways to answer every question. That's what's really wonderful about conversation. It's also very easy to get lost in the answers, though. So, if we give ourselves a picture, imagine that you are in a room, or you're in a house, you live in a house, and your job is to not be distracted while you're in the house, okay? You want to cultivate a strong focus. And inside this house, people come and go all the time with their things. They're coming into the house, they're putting things in the house. Your job is, you're just the cleaner. Your job is to just clean things up. Clean up after people, clean up the mess, and keep returning the house back to a kind of orderly, empty state, if that's the way you want to put it. However, inside this house with you, and you're not aware of it, is like an invisible, mischievous monkey demon. Okay. A demon in the sense of spirit. I should have said spirit. Don't apply all of the evil connotations to the word demon, but a mischievous monkey spirit who's always following you around and moving things and hiding your cleaning equipment and crapping and pooping all over the place. But he's also mystical and magical in that he can appear as your most cherished loved ones, and he knows the inner workings of your mind and knows what scares you the most and what entices you the most. And so he's constantly putting things around you in your environment to get you to forget that you're supposed to be cleaning up and that you're supposed to be staying focused. Mm-hmm. So trying to make progress on the path of deep cultivation alone is very much like being in that situation. Mm-hmm. Whereas having a guide or a support around you, community of people who are also cultivators, are always looking for that mischievous little monkey spirit. And if you're super hyper aware and tuned in, you can feel it when he's doing his thing. Mm-hmm. And you can look at objects in the room and you just look and you go, no, that's just the monkey. The monkey's put that there. That one's not actually real. Mm-hmm. Watch, I'll show you. And then you tune your energy into it and it dissolves, it disappears. So having an experienced guide or a teacher, a genuine teacher or community support around you of other cultivators It's just much better progress. It's much quicker progress. You get to grips with the mischievous monkey spirit more quickly, and also you get to share your life. You get to share the process of cultivation, not just with other people who are also living their lives, but going about chasing their desires and doing what they're doing, which they can do that. But you also get to share your life every day with other cultivators who are seeing things the same or in a similar way to what you do, and are wanting to get to grips with the same types of processes. They're cultivating the same energy. They're tuning into the same space of cultivation, and it's just a much nicer way to do it. So, there's lots of different ways you could answer that question, but your environment plays such an important role in the sense that your environment is where you cultivate. So if you've got people coming and going all the time, leaving crap all over the place, leaving stuff here, leaving stuff there, and you've got a mischievous spiritual monkey entity living in that house with you who's invisible for the most part, and is very hard to detect, and knows you inside and out, and knows all of your temptations and all of your fears, and knows exactly what TV show to put on in that room when you walk in there, because that's your favorite TV show, and he knows you're going to sit on that couch and watch that TV show. Like, he's very mischievous. Is the ego at work? Yeah. So that's the environment that you're in, whether you realize it or not. So to have a bit of a grip of that environment, okay, we've got people coming and going all the time. Well, how about we keep the door closed? How about we set up a sign on the door that people are only allowed to enter at a certain time? So, and also, please don't bring your shit with you. When you come into my house, please don't bring all of the chaos of the world, and don't trash my house. This is where I live. Leave your shit at the door, please. When you come into my house, it's fine to have that kind of boundary in place. That's just a kind of discipline. How that would translate is, if people who are kind of really consumed by egotistical thinking and very materialist, and that they suffer from lots of kind of toxic psychological states, you're very careful when you're interacting with those people that you don't take on too much. You don't allow yourself to be too sucked in to their plans and their objectives. So you have certain boundaries in place. Now, obviously, if you live in a place of cultivation, those people don't come to our kind of home because they just don't want to be here. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's a better kind of environment to cultivate in, if that's the way you want to go. But you can do it anywhere. If you've got the right boundaries in place, you've got the right kind of discipline, you can cultivate anywhere. So that's a very deep question, and there are many different ways to establish an environment of cultivation for yourself. Okay, yeah, so go do what you want with that. Yeah.
Okay, well, so this monkey that we're trapped inside with, how does that reflect in society? How does that relate to society?
On a social level.
On a collective.
Well, so the monkey is inside the brain. We want to call it the ego, the identity, the sense of a personal identity, which is the result of actually infinite conditioning, the time that evolution has been occurring. We can just round it out simply and say thousands upon thousands of years the human society has been evolving, and the current model of economy, internal model of economy we call the psychology, is building the world. What do we want? What are we thinking? How are we feeling? What do we want to achieve as the individual? What kind of life do we want to live as the individual? And then we're doing that on a collective level. Multiple groups of people who want the same things are getting together and building infrastructure and businesses and, all the rest of it. So the monkey is building the human society. The monkey is in charge, but the monkey is insane. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. The monkey is insane. It's insane because the spirit of life, which is the true identity of life, which doesn't identify with itself, by the way, is a key fundamental component. There is no self-identity in awareness. It is just aware. It holds on to nothing. Anyway, an identity, a self-identity in the brain. I forgot what I was saying. Awareness. I went off on too much of a tangent about awareness.
Has no identity.
Before that. how it's responsible for society and what's going on in society. So the monkey is insane because the true identity of life, which is awareness, which is absolutely everywhere, is cosmic. It touches everything in all existence everywhere. It is aware of that. It is in all things, and all things are in it. It is a total awareness of life. Some people call it God. It's the true identity of life, the source of all creation. Okay, true identity. Wonderfully peaceful, aware of everything, boundlessly energetic and joyful, joyous, enlightened mind, right? Now, the person, the people, the human, inside the human being is a brain. Inside that brain is a process of thinking, a process of perception, of sensations, all sorts of things going on inside the brain. All of those perceptions, the source of them is the senses. The brain is operating via the senses of the body to touch a little piece of the world, a little bit of the world, a little bit of the universe, right? It's feeling a little bit of it, it's seeing a little bit of it, it's hearing a little bit of it. All of that is secondhand information, though, because it takes time for those things to occur, to then travel to the brain. So the brain is interpreting what's happening a little bit behind. So that's one point, which is very deep. We'd have to get into that. But at the same time, though, there is an identification with all of that movement. There is a belief inside the brain that there is an entity, an individual entity, which is the one in control, the one doing all of this. It's the one having this experience. And so the perception, the perspective of that individual entity is to be an individual, separate and in control and responsible for the whole of the life. That's a tiny perspective, a fragmented, tiny perspective of life. Now that entity believes that it's alive, and it believes that it's the one doing it, and it has complete disregard for the truth, the reality, that actually all of life is everywhere doing this, and that all of life is the one that is doing this, and it is the one in control, and it is a process of spiritual unfoldment and spiritual evolution via the relationship between spirit and matter. The whole picture of life is the one doing this, unfolding everywhere. But the individual entity in the brain has the perception that it is the one in control. That's why it's insane. So to follow that is to completely disregard the true perspective of life and fall into a false fantasy that you as the individual are the one who is doing this. Now that thing is subject to an ending, which means death. So that thing is going to die. And it's terrified of that because it thinks that's the end. It's also, because it's operating within the brain, it's confined to memory. So it has all of these memories of a past. It thinks that it's had a past. And it identifies with those experiences and those memories. And so some of them were horrible, some of them were traumatic. It was also conditioned by society and childhood. And so it's taken on all of that data and information as within its identity of mum's name, dad's name, desires, my religion, the religion that was given to it from birth. It's got all of that going on in there, a big pile of crap. And it's stuck in that process. It can't get out of it because all of that is the contents of the brain. And the brain experiences life through the senses of the body. So it's a tiny little fragmented self-identity, body, brain. Now to be confined to that is to think, to feel like you are separated from all of life, that you are alone, and that's just not the truth. Now getting back to the social element, it's that up to now we have used to build our life with as individuals collectively, and that has formed as the society so far. It's greedy. Because it experiences the world only via the brain, it is a purely material experience of life, and so it thinks that life is all about materials, and it wants to have lots of materials, it wants to have lots of material experiences. And so throughout the years, over the course of millennia, society has evolved to be very hyper-focused on materials, material experiences, which is what we see, a complete abuse and consumption of all of the resources. These are all very deep topics which can all be broken down into multiple layers, each of them. But another important element of it is, because it is a finite resource, the egoic consciousness of the individual is finite. It can only last a certain amount of time, but it gets passed on to the next generation. If you have children, your egoic consciousness gets passed on into the brain of that one, and so it evolves over time. That's why it's actually a spiritual process. It's been going on for billions of years. You're not the one doing this. The brain is being conditioned by evolution, but we are now ready to evolve beyond it. We've all reached a point where we no longer can follow that illusory identity. The energy is becoming too intense. Our spirit is magnifying in intensity and waking up from this dream of separateness. And so now we need to forge a new way, a spiritual way of living collectively, which is what Mystic Society is representing and discussing. But one of the things that we've seen, because the ego is responsible so far for the construction of society, is that as this generational egoic consciousness has been passed along, and one being, one entity has chased material resources and then passed those material resources and the responsibility for those material resources onto their family, now in the modern era, in 2024, we have a select few group of families who have amassed all of the resources on the planet, who are hoarding it for themselves, who don't want to share it with the rest of the population because they're trying to hold on to their legacy, their personal empire, their traditional conditioning that's been passed on to them. And so there is a massive imbalance of the resources, the allocation of resources to the life here, which is why so many people are starving, so many people are without healthcare, so many people are without homes, and that those who follow the material systematic way of being have all of the resources at the top, and they have more than they need, the kind of pyramid, the top of the pyramid. They have all that they need. They have more than they need, and they can have everything that they want. And yet the people at the bottom of the structure, the social structure, can't afford what they need and are being left out in the cold, because it's a system that is pushing towards a never-ending pursuit of material gain, which is unreachable. In fact, it ends in total self-destruction, because as one group amasses the resources, and they have all the resources they can gather from their specific environment, all they can do is look to the resources of their neighbor, and their greed, their pursuit, endless pursuit of material desires wants it too. Now you have war. Those apparently two different entities will go to war with each other to try to grab the other person's resources. And the ego makes an enemy of the other consciousness. Mm-hmm. All right. Anyway, big tangent, but that was, I think, the answer to your question.
Yeah.
So don't do that. Don't go that way. Okay? Instead, go in the opposite direction, which is one in which a life must be established with more of a total awareness of the immaterial elements of one's being, the spiritual elements of one's experience, which is what meditation introduces you to. And as the totality of consciousness comes into view, one's life takes a more of a circular, spherical experience in which the energy of love is cultivated, the energy of relationship is cultivated, the energy of mind and body is cultivated, as opposed to seeking material things. There is fundamentally, essentially, a relationship between the spirit and the matter, but there's supposed to be a harmonious relationship in which the spirit can experience its life and sustain its life, sustain its ability to observe life through the body and have a human experience by using material means to sustain that. But it's not about amassing and owning and trying to grab onto the material. It's almost like a food. It's more like a food. The material elements of life are supposed to be a food for you to eat while you live, to sustain your life form, the body that you're in, for a longer period of time, so you can have a longer experience of being a physical being. But people have got it the wrong way around, and they chase the material, which leads to just destruction, actually, and disease, ultimately. Anyway, big tangent, but I'm sure there was an answer in there somewhere.
No, that's great. It's important to note that no one's coming to save us. No one is coming to save you. It really does have to be a decision within yourself to start down a new path. And in doing that, if you find people that are doing that for themselves as well,
we save each other.
We save each other, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We save each other from the inevitable hell of isolation, from following the ego and the emptiness at the end of it all, to waste a life, to waste a whole life chasing material things, to only realize at the end of your life that you can't take any of it with you. You spent your whole life paying off a mortgage. You can't take it with you. You didn't even own it in the first place. That was part of the lie.
That's the deception.
Which is why we're talking about here, awakening to the great deception. There's nobody to blame. It's our own consciousness that's been evolving. Nobody knows how far that goes. We just say for thousands upon thousands of years here on the planet, because people have a general idea how, over the last 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years, 12,000 years, civilization has formed out of more primitive, so-called primitive states of consciousness, even though there are very clearly signs of life, intelligent life, social life, existing far beyond that. But nobody knows how far back that goes. Time, how far back does time go? What happens when you go back to the place before the cosmos came into being? Where does time go when that happens? And what about the intelligence that lives there, which we all come from? How far back is that? It's forever back. Anyway, what were we talking about?
The Great Deception.
So here we're talking about the Great Deception is we are the source of that, our own egoic consciousness. So awakening to the Great Deception, which happens simultaneously with a shift within. There's some sort of change within. You feel it. You just won't know how to put it into words. You'll just know something's changing. And you see it in the world because it's a reflection of an internal process. So you start to notice things in the world. It could even be the same things you've always been experiencing in the world, but you suddenly just see through it. Or it seems different or whatever. You're not interested in it, or you feel like there must be something deeper. Because something deeper is happening within you. It's kind of taking you in a different direction. So as you awaken to that, you begin to connect with more mystical and spiritual means of life. But you will have a lot of questions in the beginning, and you may even be a little bit angry about the situation, and that's normal. But it's very important to know there's nobody to be angry at. This is a process of evolution that has been happening here for a very long time. It's okay. But it is also important to recognize that it's time for us now to go beyond it. At the same time, though, while we are trying to go beyond it, there is an element of the consciousness here which is still grasping and holding on to call it a dying way, an old way of being, the previous incarnation of the social structure. So as a new one is rising from the ashes, first of all, the old one is burning to become ashes, to rise from. So as that's happening to you on an individual level, you will witness and you will encounter still elements of life that are too far from you in a tainted kind of older egotistical system. We have to learn how to deal with that too. Don't attack it. It's dying. Why would you do that to a dying entity? Why would you do that? Why would you attack it? Wouldn't you help it to die? Wouldn't you hold its hand while it was dying, right? Wouldn't you help it to meditate so that it can die in peace? Yeah? That's the approach you have to take. If you fight it, it will fight you back, and it just makes it horrible for everyone. Because it's dying. Let it go,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, good?
Yeah.
All right, so now that we've covered those points, and remember, this is a discussion. This is not you being told what to do. This is not you being controlled. This is not another system of now you have to follow some new authority. This is about awakening the authority within each of us and learning to live in harmony with the others that are around us while we are in the authority of our own experience here, beyond ego. Anyway, now that we've kind of hinted and discussed that a little bit, how are you going with all of this?
Good. One of the most challenging aspects for me to get to grips with this lifestyle has been the financial element, like the trying to find a balance between the material and the non-material elements of life. I think you said the other day about having like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So, yeah, I just want to talk about how can people who are beginning to walk the path, beginning to awaken, how can they best find the balance between the material and the non-material aspects of life? Because it can be very hard to decondition your brain to not constantly want to go for more work, spend more of your energy earning money to give yourself the things that you want and your family the things that they want as well.
Okay, what do you think? Out of curiosity, what do you think?
It just comes down to prioritization, I guess. Prioritizing the most important
How do you know
immediate need.
Okay, how do you know what to prioritize? If I prioritize going out and earning loads and loads of money, because then I want to earn all that money, and then after that I'm going to rest, and then I'm going to cultivate. That kind of prioritization.
Well, I guess an example would be some people go to work and they work 40 to 50 hours a week and they earn a certain amount of money and they spend all of their time and energy doing that. Whereas in a day, we wake up, there's a lot of time for relaxation, for physical training, for our practices, meditation, to fulfill our roles.
Freedom now. Right?
Yes,
That's called. People talk about freedom later. Work your life, earn all your money, then you have freedom later. A lot of people don't get there. The work kills a lot of people. Plus, then when you get there, some people are just riddled with disease. They're broken from all the work. Is that the kind of freedom you're looking for? The right way to approach this is to focus on freedom now. Freedom today. Wake up with this freedom to live the kind of life now that you most deeply want to live. And I'm telling you, whether you really know it or not, it's a lifestyle that's full of space, and it's full of energy, and it's full of love, and it's full of happiness, and it's full of encounters with nature, the sun, the earth, the wind. That's what brings true joy and energy to the experience of life. But yes, in this current economy of society, there are needs, aren't there? There are financial needs.
Bound.
So it's important, and again, as I mentioned before, a specific person's circumstances would require a specific answer as to how do you step out of the situation you're in into a more appropriate lifestyle, one that is going to bring truer, more deep fulfillment. Each person would have to approach that very specifically given their circumstances, because you need to strike a balance between your worldly responsibilities, your worldly needs, the needs of your environment, the needs of the people around you in your environment, the needs of the life that you're living at the moment. Get to grips with the needs of them. Financial element is a fundamental component in this modern economy. We all have to buy food. Nobody gives us food for free, at least unless you're homeless on the street, you know. For the most part, we need money to eat, and we need money to pay rent. We ourselves need money to buy fuel to be able to drive in our vehicles to different places to camp. We also have to pay for the internet to produce these kinds of videos, etc., etc. There's a financial need, but we keep it super simple. We want to wake up in the day, we want to eat healthy. Great, so we put a bit of money into that. We also like to buy the cleanest drinking water that we can afford, which we don't like to drink the town water, which has all of the chemicals in it. We use that for washing and stuff, but so that has a cost. The fuel obviously has a cost. Our vehicles need to be maintained. In fact, we've got 2 being booked in for a service in a few days. But these are essential needs for the sustenance of our spiritual life, to wake up in a day, to love our experience, to care for our body, to eat well, to walk through the world, to walk through the earth. When I say that, the world, nature. I need to feel the sun on my skin, and I need to feel the wind and breathe, and I need to swim in the oceans. and I need to love my relationships. Those are free. That's all free. You can do that for free. But to sustain the vehicles, to eat well, there is a financial element. So we turn our material objectives towards sustaining our spiritual needs. All right? So the matter, the material of our experience is in service to our spirit. But we're in touch with our spirit. We know what that is. We know how it functions. We know how it operates. We know the needs of the spirit, and we serve the needs of the spirit. Okay? Some people might call that living a life in devotion to God, but it's a very deep version of that. It's the truest, deepest form of that relationship between matter and spirit. Whereas most people are taking all of the energy of their life and turning the energy of their life towards material pursuits that aren't needs. They are rather desires. We covered desire in a previous episode. Mm-hmm. And what you have there is a spirit that has been enslaved and is forced to try to reach some place in the matter, which is a total illusion. From the point of view of the spirit of life, the material existence is a dream. It's a conjuration. It's a fantasy. It's an illusion. It's like a video game. So if you're trying to get somewhere in a video game, you're actually insane. It's a video game. You know what I mean? It's not a real place. It's a fantasy. Maybe a lot of the audience today are familiar with video games. When you're watching a video game, even when you're watching a movie, it looks like there's a giant space on that screen and that you can really live in the world and go around and be a character, and there's a giant distance to that mountain over there that you want to go and climb in the game. But there isn't. Those are just pixels on a screen. That's just electrical information tricking your brain into thinking that there's a distance. Then you've got virtual reality, which is the next level to that illusion and deception. And consciousness functions in the same way. For the spirit, the point of view of the spirit, matter is just virtual reality. Virtual reality. So if you're trying to get somewhere in that world, you're actually insane. Mm-hmm. You think it's real. However, I think I've deviated. What's the question?
Well,
how do we prioritize?
Yeah, finding balance.
So we have to learn to live in a virtual world, knowing that it is a virtual world and that it's supposed to be here for our spiritual experience, our spiritual enjoyment. So feel free to wear the virtual reality headset, but don't ignore the one that is playing the game. Mm. Very important. Mm-hmm. If you start to believe that the real world is the character that you're playing, you're going to have a real rough time of it, because that thing's going to end. It dies, But coming to grips with the spirit, the one who is behind the movement of the illusion, the one who is responsible for the illusion arose out of the spirit of life, God, the awareness. So it's very important to get to grips with this. Mm-hmm. Learn how to contact the spirit of life, connect with it deeply, cultivate a deep relationship with that energy, that force, and begin to turn your material elements of life towards the needs of the spirit. Believe me, your life will flourish in ways you can't even imagine, and also in ways that are completely unobtainable by the ego, by chasing the ego. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does that answer it?
Yeah, it does.
As people begin to raise the question of politics, it's like that's where things get complicated, because politics is the domain of the ego. It's arguing different points of view. So it's a thing we have to overcome. In community, it's essential to establish insight into how life is working. That is already established. Life has its own policies, and they're not intellectual policies. They are the way. It's called the Tao, the way in which life evolves, the way in which life happens, the process that it goes through to experience itself. Our job, the job of a mystic, is to align, to see, to encounter that, the deepest experience and expression of that process, and to then live in that, as that, aligned with it. Union is another term for it. Union with that, yoga, right? The aim of yoga is to realize that union. So it is already established. There is nothing to argue about. But the views on it, the misunderstandings of it, the misrepresentations of it will argue. So our job collectively is to help ourselves, to help each other. Go beyond that politics, go beyond that argument, and instead realize the union collectively, and in which we all realize, wow, it's already established. It's already here. It's been doing this since before time. It knows exactly what it's doing. But we, in the perception of the individual, on the other hand, can't grasp it and misunderstand it and misrepresent it. So that's a better answer to the question of politics. At the end of the day, this is materialized by people. This isn't going to happen. This isn't happening. The experience of human consciousness evolving is not happening without humanity, right? So it's important for humans to get involved, isn't it? To begin to identify correctly, to begin to live correctly, in the sense of beginning to inquire into this process for themselves and connect with it and gain real deep insight into it so that they can manage it effectively and cope with it effectively, so that collectively the shift happens, the material change happens. Feel free to just move quickly to get it over and done with. Okay, the slower you do it, the longer it lasts. So, Charlotte trying to be real cautious and gentle. So, how are you going with it all? Yeah, how's it all going for you? How are you finding that in your own life, as you have begin to more directly align with this lifestyle? What are you seeing from it? What are you observing?
Well, I'm starting to really see or witness the real hell that I was putting myself in.
Right.
To understand that hell, the suffering, how on the outside I would constantly present as if everything is okay, when deep down I'm distressed and I was in turmoil. So I'm starting to see into that, and how I was conditioned that way, but I propelled the cycle and I put myself through that. That was the doing of my own brain, repeating patterns, getting myself into what felt like a jail cell within my mind, and then having to run and escape and get away as quickly as I could, because I couldn't handle the pain that I was feeling by sitting in those situations anymore. So in realizing that and being able to see that, I'm able to walk forward in a new direction where I feel more safe than ever, more secure in the insecurity.
You're not afraid of the insecurity.
Yeah, I'm not afraid. I mean, I still have fear of the insecurity, but I'm working on that actively and I'm seeing that, so it doesn't have the power over me that it used to. Ultimately, like, I'm just loving my life. I've had my own awakening about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was so lost and confused and hopeless and just hated myself, like self-destruction 101. And I went on a journey. I've been on a journey to try and find some peace in that and some freedom. Ultimately, freedom is what it always came down to. And yeah, I feel like I'm finding that. I'm finding that peace and freedom, and it's not out there. It's not the government controlling me. It's not the government being like allowing me to have my freedom. It's me deciding that I can be free, like right now. I don't have to be stuck in that cycle anymore. I can be free and I can be at peace right now. And what I notice is when I sit down in the moment, everything's okay. Like the inner patterns of my brain they don't have any control over me because I'm seeing them for what they are. So I guess that's why it's so incredibly important to be able to sit down and see it for yourself and witness it for yourself, because we can sit here and tell people a million times over what we're doing and the way, but unless you, the person watching, actually sit down and take responsibility, you won't see it.
The right kind of responsibility.
The right kind of responsibility.
This is why we do it. And it's so vital. This demonstration of suffering is beyond essential. Like, the term essential doesn't cut it. It's fundamentally necessary. Because the truth of the situation is what we're cultivating. Society is consumed by so much presentation and so much falsity. Because it's ruled by the ego, that's the way that it goes. So the opposite of that, the demonstration of reality, the fundamental acknowledgement of one's own personal suffering, is so, you just can't do it without that. If you're denying the fact that you have confusion, that you're afraid, that you feel lost, without that honest recognition, the truth cannot flourish from there. Some schools of mysticism really dial into this term suffering, to acknowledge one's own suffering and to not cover it up with more distraction, to not cover it up with more illusion, to not pretend that it's not there, to not pretend that the suffering you're experiencing is actually just the way it's meant to be and that that's life and that there's nothing you can do about it. That's fundamentally essential, but it's also quite difficult. What was the catalyst for you in going from all of that, from being in that world and from feeling lost? What's changed for you? Because I can imagine, potentially, that some people who watch this might feel kind of similar. They might feel like this, they think they're doing what they're doing, they're trying to cultivate, they're trying to do their meditation, but there's still some kind of, they're involved with their manifestation communities and the mind coaches and all this sort of stuff. They're awake, or they've had their awakening, and they see the corruption of the government and they want it all to end and they want to bring about a heaven on earth, but at the same time they're still possibly struggling with this. How do we do it? Like, how do we make it happen? Like, is this really the right way to do it? Maybe they try all the mind coaching stuff and it just doesn't seem to work, or they chase the desires of it and it still leads them to the same empty place. Like, so, what's different for you now? How are you getting to the bottom of this more thoroughly, more completely? In your own words.
The catalyst would be truly seeing it for myself, like the awareness of it. You don't know it's there unless you become aware of it. So I seem to be someone who always needs proof of things. So I met you and there was this path of cultivation.
Did that help you?
Yes. Yes.
Why?
Because
why was that? What was it like before that to after that?
Well, before, it's a bunch of people telling you a million different things of what they think of what they're doing. People are telling you. The difference with you is that you said, I can't do it for you, but I can be here for you, and I can show you, I can guide you, I can help you, but I can't do it for you. You need to do it for yourself. So there was a deep part of me that was like in need of self-control, control over my own being. and self-responsibility, like the amount of times in my life that lack of discipline and lack of self-responsibility and lack of self-control has got me into a hell. So you're offering to help guide me out of that hell, but not do it for me.
I'll leave you in hell if you're not gonna climb out, because I'm not going back there.
No.
I spent years climbing out of it. In that example, like the true approach is this person has an opportunity to get out. You open up a door. Are you ready? No? Okay, the door closes. You stay there for a little bit longer. You're on your own down there. We'll always be here for you. Open the door whenever you want to. But you cannot descend back into hell to get that person out of it. It doesn't work that way.
No.
So sorry to interrupt, but
No.
that's the way it has to be. You're responsible for this, you know? You have your own power and authority to embrace, to begin climbing. We will help you climb. But if you stop climbing, we're
going this way.
Right, because we're continuing to elevate. Right.
Yeah, so...
Which is a hard truth.
Truly hard. Like,
Right.
Ryan and I were talking the other day about how it's like, it's your chance. You've been given a chance, an opportunity here, and you either grab it and you run with it and you have the courage to follow through with it, or you don't and you stay where you are and you rot, basically. You've told me before about how you have like 3 options. Like, you either like let someone else lead you and you go where they're going, or you don't let anyone lead you and so you sit there and you rot, or you get up and you do it yourself. And so there's those decisions to make, and that decision to really do it for myself, I guess.
When did that happen? Do you remember when you made that decision that you were going to grab hold of this and you were going to cultivate it? Do you know when that happened, or was it more of a process?
It wasn't more of a decision. It was like, well, it was a decision, but it also, like, you don't have a choice. Once you see what you see, which I think was the catalyst, like, if you're seeing it, like, you can't ignore it. You can't ignore it, and you can't. There's parts of you that will trick yourself into thinking you're seeing all these things when you're not. But there's a part of you that knows what you're seeing, and when you see that truth, or when you feel that truth, and I don't mean like seeing, I mean like you're seeing this play out in front of you, experiencing it. When you're experiencing it for yourself and no one's telling you what to do or where to go, or you just know, you don't have a choice. You've actually just got to follow through with that, because you know that if you were to go back from that, you would descend into greater and greater depths of suffering. I would.
All right.
Anyway.
Well, that's the way it goes for a lot of people, and a lot of people aren't there either. Too, they're off in their own lives, doing their own things, and that's fine. They're not our responsibility. It's not our place to be telling people what to do. It's just a sharing. You're sharing your life with this spirit of cultivation. That's all it is. We're not here to dominate people. We're not here to make people do anything. But in our own life in a day, we turn inward and cultivate the energy of presence that has an effect on our life. And so for other people who begin to connect with that and begin to embrace the same kind of lifestyle, that spreads naturally, and it just improves everybody's experience and brings us together. And, to be able to connect with, the term is really like an authentic lineage. If you meet, mystics, monks, deep cultivators, deep spiritual devotees have been around for as long as humanity has existed, in the human realm. And the cultivators have cultivated certain kinds of awakening and energy, and they're in the same way that, like, a family passes on their property to their children and they have an inheritance. There is an inheritance that's passed on from a teacher or a cultivator, a deep cultivator, mystic or monk traditionally passed on to their students and the people who gravitate towards them. And so when you encounter an energy that has been being transmitted, cultivated and transmitted, to the origin of which nobody actually knows how far back that goes, because it's been here for as long as anyone can remember. It's a power and a force that just absolutely overwhelms your life in all of the most wonderful ways. Mm-hmm. So if you have confusion, if you're struggling around with all of these new age, more modern approaches to spirituality, and it feels like it's a bit tainted or corrupted, or you followed it and it's led you down all these different places, so you end up feeling lost, or you've just chased the material realm, material world for so long it's exhausting you and seems to be leading you to just death, I suppose, if you really look at it. A meaningless end to a life that has not really fulfilled you or really made you happy or given you any answers. To come into contact with a force of life which is drastically different, is unavoidable. It is so detectable to your mind that you just cannot do anything except want to know what that is. Yeah. Right.
I want to know what you know.
It's a pure curiosity.
Yeah.
That's from your spirit. Your own spirit is connecting with whatever that force is, and it desperately wants to know, what is that? Something in you which is so fascinated with life and so curious about how all of this got here, wants to know where it all came from, and it's filled with joy and excitement at the prospect of exploring this new place that it's just appeared in, whatever this place is, has connected with that force, and now it wants to know what that is. And so there is a merging, a coming together of those apparently separate beings. So what we're talking about here is just mystic society, mystics awakening, the spirit of life awakening in humanity. And it's wonderful, and it should be cultivated, and it needs to be cultivated, especially in a world that is so rampantly uncultivated, or rather is cultivating just material destruction and war and greed and the pursuit of all of this empty material endeavors that they go about. But it was very nice to hear your side of that, and I think that's very important for people to hear, because there's something mysterious about the deep mystical cultivation which is very curious and strange. But the raw honesty of a person seeking and their experience is powerful in equal measure, and is an inspiration, and is very important to help people begin to see and allow themselves to say, I'm the same. If I'm honest with myself, I'm deeply suffering here and I'm miserable and I really want to do something about it. Instead of all of this false pretense, which we won't get too into, around, you are already God, your life is already perfect, you can have whatever you want, that whole domain of spiritual materialism. Instead of that, to connect with a true, just raw honesty of what you're really experiencing is so refreshing and wonderful. So maybe that's why the question was asked.
What?
So is there anything else you want to go into for the time being for this one?
I think that's it for now. I think that's it for this one.
Strange, distant observer. Any comments? None whatsoever.
No, there's just from what you spoke about before, it was a similar feeling I had when I saw the hell I was in, and I knew there was a way out of it because I'd come to this training before, but the courage to get out of it wasn't there. So I pushed myself further and further down until breaking point, and that's when I finally got out. So I had to reach rock bottom before making the change, even knowing that it was pushing myself further into misery, but I knew that's where I needed to go before I would make the change to get out of it.
And there's the proof that when you're ready, the helping hand comes back. Like, are we ready now? You know, like, is now the time to come back, to get out? Like, the opportunity to grow and evolve is there for everybody, but a lot of people just aren't ready for it. But it doesn't go anywhere. Life after life after life, the spirit of life is right there with you. It's watching, it knows what you're experiencing. So when you're ready, the same hand reaches out, ready to take it, ready to go now, ready to evolve. But that takes some serious courage, and honesty. You might not be ready, and that's fine, but you might be ready, and then we've got some work to do, Okie dokie, I suppose that's it for another episode.
I would just, encourage people watching to reach out. We've got a whole heap of links below in the description of whatever platform you're watching this on. Mystic Society is for the people, so reach
By
out.
The people.
By the
For
people.
the people.
For the people.
We are the people.
Reach out if you need help, or you just need friends, or you just need support, or you want to help in any way.
The spirit of life is in coming together. Okay, alone in your deep meditation, there is insight, deep insight. But it is also in coming together, To be isolated in the material world is not the way. So for us coming together, connecting, saying hello, the spirit of life, awakening, unity, this experience of unity and oneness, consciously, in connection, in community, allowing this spirit of oneness to lead us as opposed to being led. Did we get into that in this episode? I don't think we did we? As opposed to being led by the spirit of ego, which is very dominant here in this material society, leaders who are interested in material gains, as opposed to that, being led by the oneness of life, in communion with it, conscious communion. It's not distant, it's not hidden, it's not really some distant, mysterious, mystical state to get to. There are elements of that exploration, but it is absolutely present and fully accessible at all times. This wisdom of the heart. Ladies and gentlemen, I suppose that's it, is it? Thank you for watching.
Goodbye for now.
Toodle pip.